this is the next internet, and people don't realize that. This is the next thing that every entrepreneur is building upon.
If you're listening to this, you're probably somehow connected to the internet. Or at one point, we're connected to the internet to be able to download this onto your podcast platform. Or maybe you're listening to it on YouTube. Either way, you probably use the internet to get this episode, just as I use the internet to distribute it, to put it out to the world. And when we think about the internet, we often maybe take it for granted. But there was a time where the internet was seen as something dangerous. There was a lot of FUD around the internet. Oh, if you get on the internet, all these bad things are going to happen. Now, today, we use the internet for everything. It's how we apply to jobs. It's how we see our doctor. It's how we see our therapists. It's how we meet people that we want to date. We use the internet for literally everything. But once again, there was a time where there was a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the internet. Then the internet came along, and then on top of that, we put a layer called social media. We had another whole boom of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And along comes a new thing, a new technology that's trying to help us move forward, especially how we communicate with one another. And that happens to be Web3. Now, my guest today, David All, will break down exactly what Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3 is, but Web 3 is just the most recent iteration of how we as humans are going to connect essentially on the internet. And to think about it as though it were the internet or the new internet, we as individuals, as communities, and as a country should be open to it. We should be curious about it. We should ask questions. We should try to find ways to move it forward. When we ask questions, we open doors. When we make statements, we close doors. And so my guest today, David All, has founded Founder. What is Founder? It's a nonprofit, non-partisan coalition of educators, storytellers, artists, builders, creators, change makers who are advocating for the responsible adoption of Web3 in the United States. So without further ado, let's dive in and learn more about Founder. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is More Than Blockchain. David, welcome to More Than Blockchain. How are you?
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on. I have been watching from a distance, and you've been doing some stuff. We met at NFT NYC. We've also put together a minting between Mercy Core. Remind me of the name, because I want to say Studio, but I know it's not.
Change Gallery.
The Change Gallery, right, because it was Change DAO, Change Gallery, okay. And we've already worked on a project together, which is really quite cool. And I feel like that's kind of rare in Web3. I feel like you have a lot of contacts, and it's really cool, and you have synergy. And now you are on to a new project. But I feel like it, if you connect the dots moving backwards, a la Steve Jobs' commencement speech, this seems to make sense. So why don't you please go ahead, tell us about who you are, and talk to us about how David gets to Founder.
Well, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk about Founder. For me, I started my career in Washington, D.C. as a speechwriter in the U.S. Senate and jumped over to the House of Representatives and worked in a leadership position, helping a whole group of folks figure out how to communicate with new mediums like blogging and social media and YouTube at the time. And, that was 2005, 2006, and was able to get out on the campaign trail quite a bit. And there I really learned a lot of new strategies and tactics. Developed those tactics about how we could build online communities, right, that care about the causes that they care about. And started the first social media agency in Washington, D.C. in 2007. And that was like the beginning of my entrepreneurship career. And I've got to be honest, it's not something I planned on doing. I mean, like a lot of people, I came to Washington, D.C. to make an impact and change the world. And I think along the way, I've come to realize that the best way for me to do that is to not have any sort of anything hindering me or stopping me, and just drive forward in that place of entrepreneurship and creating something out of nothing, as they say. And so I started that social media agency in DC 2007, worked with politicians all over the world, Senate races, gubernatorial races, worked with, all of the movement folks, the nonprofit folks, helped just teaching people how to use these new technologies. I was really the only person that was doing it for a large group of folks. Worked with all the trade associations, and in that experience, that was like my formative years in my 20s. I was that bridge from Web 1 to Web 2, and I was physically the bridge. And I did that by pulling people together, by talking about this technology as a practitioner that they trusted, that, I came from. The first thing I ever did was a speechwriter in the US Senate. And that's a pretty high entry point, and it kind of gave me this opportunity to always have an opportunity to share my vantage point on communications and the evolution of communications. Long story short, I became a little bit uninterested with the divisiveness of politics and moved to San Francisco and started working on another startup with my agency as well, and focused there with working with big tech. And I worked with Intel and Google, and really told stories about how artists were empowered by technology to create. I was working a lot with application developers. It was kind of the beginning of all of that, like people having stores where people could choose apps. I mean, now it seems so kind of old school to even think about, but that was the challenge back then. It's like, how do we inspire developers to build apps in our marketplace so that consumers can better use this technology? And, out there I worked with, a group called Burning Man, which is the world's largest festival on public land. It's an arts festival. And I was able to help them back here in DC. And that was really the opportunity for me to realize that, even though I had left Washington, everything I had built here was still there, and my name and integrity were really helpful to new types of folks that I wanted to help, like Burning Man. And so, with them, I helped them tell a totally different story. Whatever people think about Burning Man, it's the world's largest, public event on public land. And so everything they do actually depends on whether or not they get a permit from the Department of Interior. And so their reputation matters. And to help them tell their story, I focused on their economic impact in Reno, call every single small business in Reno and find out exactly how much money, get the receipts of how much money is driven into Reno, which, as you know, is sort of they're in a transition moment, right? It's kind of like gaming and stuff. They've gone through a lot of change. And Burning Man is a huge economic driver. They drive a lot of new jobs. And we told that story through a salon-style event here. We told that story through the media, through the press, and through private dinner parties. And, just one-on-ones with like people from my network. And those folks are still going to Burning Man today. And they bring their friends to Burning Man. And so when it comes to like shifting the narrative in Washington, D.C., I'm really relying on this background of evolving and really driving a new way to communicate and changing the culture of Washington, D.C. through storytelling, bringing people together with new technologies. And so long story short, as you know, like the 10 years after that, I've been focused on civic hacking and sort of at the frontier of making an impact with these creative knowledge skill sets that we have in towns all across America. And most recently, I was in Seattle working on ChangeDAO, Change Gallery, and I was observing what was going on in Web3. And I was observing our colleagues that just clearly had no clue how DC works, attacking a non-elected public official, for example, that is responsible for ensuring that the United States is sort of managing systemic risk in a legitimate way. And also I was noticing that all of the folks that were in DC, no one was talking about the amazing stuff that was happening. Everyone was just using this term crypto, and they were focused on things like exchanges. And, it was like such a small, narrow viewpoint as to what was happening. So I got in my car, literally left Seattle, moved back to Washington, D.C., and here I am. And we just launched Founder. And Founder is a coalition. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan group of entrepreneurs, builders, and innovators focused on the responsible adoption of Web3 and blockchain technology in the United States.
That was absolutely amazing. And thank you so much for that background and also starting to introduce Founder. One of the things that you said really resonated with me personally because it's how I feel I kind of fit into Web3. And it's that one word that you used, which is a bridge. And in a time in your career years ago, you were the bridge between Web 1 and Web 2. You were the one that was saying, hey, you know what? This social media thing is going to allow us to share our narrative with people way beyond your local newspaper route, way beyond your local cable news circuit. So when you started to talk there, I was like so curious about what are things, kind of paradigms or principles or overarching themes, I guess is probably better, that you see as that were voiced challenges in that moment that are now voiced challenges again. Because I'm sure that there must be similarities. They say history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And so what are kind of the FUD narratives that were there between Web 1 and Web 2 when you were like, hey, you know what? I think we need a Facebook page. Hey, you know what? This new thing's coming up. It's Instagram. We should check that out. Or hey, maybe we want to find a niche, find our market, find our people on Twitter. What were kind of the FUD to now when you're like, you know what? I think tokenization can help communities become stronger, or tokenization can support artists to be able to just get more value from their hard work or their proof of work. So yeah, what are some of the overarching themes you're seeing once again?
That's a fantastic question. It's one I haven't thought about, but I would like the things that were coming to mind are that when I started talking about Web 2, I focused on the numbers. And when you have elections, when you have campaigns, you have exact numbers of whether you win or lose. And I had determined at the time, it was like 2006, we had just lost the House and the Senate majorities. It was like very close races. It was only 32 races, 31 House seats, and maybe one Senate race. And it was a total of less than 1% in each of those races. And it was a very, very small number when it came down to it, like hundreds of votes in each of the races, which made the difference. So I was simply making the point then, as a communicator, that it wasn't our message that needed to be fixed, but rather that the message just wasn't reaching the entirety of the audience, because the audience is moving into these new digital communities where there is no message for them to connect with and communicate with. So that was the Web 2 concept. And so I was focused on bringing, long before lobbyists showed up, long before the Web 2 companies showed up to lobby Capitol Hill, I was holding press secretaries workshops and working across aisles with folks to learn how to use this technology. And those technologies, fortunately back then, right, were fantastic user experience. Anyone could just sign up, create a Twitter account, or at least just follow someone. It was like the barrier of entry was zero at the time, right? We didn't realize what was actually happening with all the data and the privacy issues and all of the broken promises that were made. With Web3, we're facing a multifaceted crisis, really, and it's a brand crisis. But, a lot of the challenge is folks in town, for example, may not have access to, however you learned about Web3 in the first place. Just think about that whole journey you went on. Folks here may not have access to that. So their limited access to information and to subject matter experts is one piece of it. The other is just the technology itself is very difficult. It's complex technically. The user experience is not there, but there are also compliance barriers. It's actually not allowed. It's not, it would be out of compliance for a lot of folks around the Washington, D.C. area to even go on a journey with these technologies. compare that to AI, which I know is another topic that you care a lot about. I went to a congressional caucus meeting for AI, and the moderator started by asking how many people here thought we were here to talk about generative AI, artificial intelligence, and no one raised their hands, not a single person. And then the second question was, who here has used ChatGPT? And every single hand went up in the air. So ChatGPT, as you know, is based on the same exact model of Web 2, right? People don't realize yet the risks of uploading all of their information, their sensitive data, to someone else's server and letting someone else train their model, which is now used by every single user. People aren't thinking about that, right? This digestion issue that is causing serious problems throughout Fortune 500, that's causing problems for really anyone that has sensitive, confidential information and third-party vendors that do work for them, right? There's just a lot of issues. But so, yeah, there are just like a lot of issues that we have with Web3, and those are a few.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talk about AI because just today and like the last episode before this episode for you, where you're going to be guest on More Than Blockchain podcast, was me kind of talking about WorldCoin. And we're going to go a little bit away from Founder. We will come back to Founder. But WorldCoin, for people who are listening and they haven't kind of looked into it, is a really interesting new angle that Sam Altman, who is behind ChatGPT, is kind of diving in, where he's putting crypto and AI in the exact same conversation. And he's saying, look, this is the TLDR thesis. There could be a time in the future of civilization where AI is so powerful and so well developed that it will take jobs away from people. And we still will probably be in a capitalist structure where people are going to need to pay rent or pay their mortgage, buy some food, and be able to live life, get water, have sanitation, just kind of like basic things, right? And so his thing is like, well, let's use AI to pay people. We'll take some of the profits from AI, and if you become a part of this new ecosystem we're creating, then you'll be able to basically get dividends from the future revenue flow of AI's financial success. Now, that's setting the stage, the context for my next question, which is, and this is something I didn't think we were going to get into, but I love that you've just talked about this, because you said, look, like whether we're talking about the large language models of ChatGPT, or we're thinking about the future of something like WorldCoin, or the way that we as humans are going to continue to interact with the digital and virtual world. And two words came up for me: data privacy, and I guess I'm putting this together, data privacy, and then broken promises. For the person that's listening, what is it about Web3 that is better for data privacy and will hopefully have fulfilled promises, as opposed to broken promises that maybe we've had in Web 2, where Facebook used all of our data to do whatever they wanted? Google, is still part of that engine. They literally just run off our data. Our data is their electricity. So yeah, what about Web3 for you is really exciting when you think about data privacy, and instead of broken promises, what are the fulfilled promises? And I know that this may be theoretical for right now where we are, as there are far and few between use cases, but talk to me about things you're seeing now and then things that are upcoming over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so first let me address your question about Web3 and the promises of Web3. And really we have to think a little bit about, like, let's step back, right? Let's step back to Web 1 and Web 2 and Web 3 and kind of talk about the need of why these things even exist, right? Like, why haven't we just stopped innovating? So with Web 1, this was the idea of people being able to publish content on a website where anyone could consume it, right? This was really the evolution of browsers. Search popped up. Folks were able to consume content that was there. Web 2 came along and gave us this ability to update information that was on somebody else's server. So this is when we had social media. We were able to add a status update, right? David All is, that was kind of like the beginning of Facebook with their status updates. But with Instagram, TikTok, all of this content that people are uploading, it actually exists in somebody else's server. And then people kind of came along and said, well, that's not fair because the only people that can monetize that are the people that have access and own that content, the people that have the servers. And so Web3 came and said, okay, let's change all of that. Let's create a network that is run differently. And in that network, the creators actually can own that content, and people can actually purchase or acquire or own the content that they allow protocols or decentralized applications to utilize, like a person, information, right, about who you are, your profile. We're seeing this with Threads talking about the Fediverse concept with social media, which I think is exciting to see someone like Meta sort of going in this direction where you're going to be able to take all of your content and utilize it elsewhere in other platforms that are sort of built around this same network. And so that's really like the need for Web3. And the promise of Web3 is we are at the start of it, really. I mean, Bitcoin is only 14 years or so years old, 15 years. And if we think about just in tech time, that's actually not a lot. It's going to be another 10 years or so before this is really mass adoption. People don't even know what's happening. But it's another huge building block to where we're going. And that's what I'm concerned about as a human, and what I'm concerned about as someone that cares so much about the United States of America. And for me, it's Founder is the start of something, and it's starting with Web3, but it is acknowledging a serious gap of understanding and tech literacy that exists with decision makers and regulators. And there has to be this trusted partner that can bring in subject matter experts that aren't lobbyists and that are not advocating positions and that have no skin in the game. And they just want people to understand, go on a journey, and be a part of, like, Web3, for example, right now is something I care about. But I'm focused on Web5, right? I'm focusing on building my next things that I'm starting to think about in my head in a world where there's a processor in every single device around us. And those devices are running or have smartphone processors that are very smart, that have storage within them. And, it's just Moore's Law, which Intel created. And everything is networked. And everything is peer-to-peer networks. And all of a sudden, there isn't even this huge idea of like a cloud, but rather this idea of a fog. And what happens when there's a fog? What happens when every single thing we do is connected, can be connected to something that is untraceable, is unstoppable? It just exists, right? How does humanity change? And those are the things, like, I want government and regulated. I want the United States of America to win. That is why I care so much about getting Web3 right. And it's not because I am a lobbyist or have anyone. This is an independent nonprofit project. And we are focused just so much on bringing people to the table that can just explain it. Let's bring the core devs to Washington, D.C. Let's have some pizza, some beer, let's have a good time. And like, those devs will sit there and talk to you until you're blue in the face, but you'll walk out of there understanding Bitcoin and understanding Ethereum. So yeah, I want to start from step zero. I want to explain to people what Web 1 is, because that's where we are. I'll kind of stop there because obviously I could keep going.
No, this is absolutely wonderful. And I want to thank you earlier on for breaking down Web 1, Web 2, and here we are with Web 3, because I think that is something that is often lost in the mire when sometimes myself or maybe you or anyone tries to explain it to other people. There's so many things that we know that maybe we aren't aware that other people don't know, which all I'm describing here is assumptions. And you said earlier two things. You said, look, like when Twitter came out, it was really great because it was so easy to put in your email, get on, follow someone, tweet at them, maybe send them a DM. It was super easy, right? And what you were talking about there is the UX or UI. It was set up with lower barriers to entry, like the barriers to entry into the app. We know that in Web3, It is not easy. I've tried to mint things and I still struggle sometimes because I'm like, I'm going to Polygon to ETH, or I'm trying to buy this, or it's just not that simple, or I thought I moved this over, it didn't work. If you've ever tried to move crypto, you know exactly what we're talking about if you ever tried to mint something. So one, barriers to entry is a challenge, I'm sure, for founders, for founder, I should say. And then two is access. The access to the information. Those seems to be things that I think founder must be looking at as like, yeah, if we can solve these two, even at 1% increasing a day, we're going to crush it over the next 2 to 3 years. So what is founder doing and how are you looking at the barrier to entry and then the access?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I love how you framed it there. So access to me, so I am a storyteller, as I started my career as a speechwriter, but in my hobby is storytelling. This is how I see the world. I see the world through patterns and the science of storytelling, and have brought, I've created more than 75 events around storytelling. And for me, we just kicked off this event at wonderful Bright Moments in New York City, wonderful art gallery, a Web3 space, and it's a safe space. Here in DC, there are 0 Web3 spaces. There are no art galleries. There are no co-working Web3 spaces. There's nothing. And in New York, there's a Bitcoin bar, PubKey, which is amazing. There's Bright Moments. There's tons of galleries and co-working spaces for Web3. Nothing here. So, the one thing that we have to think about is this idea of common ground, right? There has to be this space, not only in a physical sense, and you can create them temporarily, of course, where people can come and ask questions, right? That's kind of like a safe space, a common ground. It's really important, non-threatening, non-lobbying, non-partisan, and just there for anyone, right? Free events, right? You don't have to you can just show up, and that's what people need. So that idea of common ground is really important for founder and making that happen. Our next event is in Austin, Texas. We can't wait to go to Austin, Texas around the permissionless event and do something there that just brings the whole community together to tell stories. And that's really the second big piece of what we're doing. In politics, I called it flooding the zone. But here it's a bit different, and I call it positive stories repeatedly. Here in Washington, D.C., the face of crypto is Sam Bankman-Fried, or someone who's under investigation by some U.S. regulatory body. And we have to change the face of Web3, and this is our opportunity. Because as you know, the face of Web3 does not look like the face of Web1. It does not look like the face of Web 2. It's actually empowering people from all over the world, from all walks of life. So at our founder event in New York City, and I hope you post a link to to the article and see some of the pictures. It was, we heard from Elise Swopes, who's just an extraordinary self-taught artist who is now one of the top influencers in the world, who's created a career because of Web3. And Elise focuses on social impact and making the world a better place through these tools for folks that are incarcerated. She's helping them create NFTs and learning these new skills inside of jail and, just taking on these tough issues in powerful new ways. But we also heard from Mike Buke. And Mike is a West Point grad, U.S. Army officer for 8 years, still in the Army Reserves, went to Harvard Business School, and now runs squadtalent.xyz, focusing on helping companies find this difficult to find new kind of worker, this super talent Web3 developer, so that they can build and kind of figure out the new ways that they want to work, which is largely based on kind of fractional and remote and sometimes anonymous and being paid in crypto and cryptocurrency and stuff like that. So, reimagining the work with these tools and how they're empowered to do that. But those are two examples of folks that have great stories to tell. And they have the ability, kind of like a welcome mat, of connecting with a certain group of folks that would like to learn from their vantage point, right? And they are, as you know, entrepreneurs are great teachers. And entrepreneurs, builders, innovators, the people that use this stuff, the practitioners, the people that build the stuff are the people that explain it. And I know you sort of acknowledged, and thanked me for saying Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. But guess what? I heard that first from Jeff Dinkelman, ChangeDAO's senior Solidity developer, on our podcast. And I was like, that's the smartest thing I've never heard anyone say before. And I heard it from a core developer and trying to explain, this technology to a lay audience. The last thing I want to talk about briefly is just this culture of learning. And it has to exist, right? There, if I could host an event every single day, if I could teach people every single day about Web3 from the vantage point of the things they care about in the world, whether it's workforce reimagination in their constituent districts, whether it's national security and how powerful Web3 is, whatever it is, we have to be talking about these stories with teaching people how to use and understand the capabilities, because it's vast, it's complex, it's not easy to understand. You can't just open Twitter, create an account, and send a tweet. It's far, far different. It's not all there, right? We know the technology's not that, there are user experience challenges that we have to overcome. And yeah, so that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things I want to call out, because I think it leads into kind of where I want to take the conversation next, is that you said this is happening all around the world. And I know for a fact, I live most of my time in Colombia. There are hubs in Medellin and in Bogota that are Web3 friendly, even now. So to know that there's not one in the nation's capital of the place that people literally will die to get to, as far as they think it's a place that has potential and promise because of the innovative history around the country, that to me is really sad. And I think that's where I want to go, because this is something that Anthony Pompliano talks a lot about on Twitter, which is the United States falling behind in innovation, in curiosity, in leading the way through tech. And that to me is so central to United States' narrative as a country. The United States is still, compared to European nations or much of the world, if we even look at China or Asia or Africa, is a baby. It is still almost in its infancy, with being 200, almost 50 years old at this point. And so the narrative of the United States for me, as someone who was who was born in another country, came to this country as a baby, and then was a naturalized citizen, has always been a place of amazing potential and amazing opportunity. The opportunity exists here to allow you to maximize your potential. And somewhere in there is a chance to probably be around innovation, whatever that looks like. And so for me, the narrative of the United States, as you are the storyteller, is almost hurt by not leaning into crypto, not leaning into Web3, not leaning into Bitcoin. Is that part of how you're starting to, or you've been structuring it? Maybe when you talk to politicians, if there are kind of ideas around patriotism and overall the United States economy just being competitive on the world stage.
Let me quickly state that FTX caused a serious political problem. And for folks that don't understand how politics in the US works and everything else, Sam Bankman-Fried himself was the number 2 largest donor to the Democratic Party. And so when this all went down, all of those people who took money had a lot of egg on their face. And something that was bipartisan before became extremely partisan, and people shut their doors immediately out of safety, right? And to keep their reputation, try to improve their reputation. So that was 2022, right? So we're kind of a little bit beyond that. But very specifically to your point about America's competitiveness, let me say that, there is a lack of voices fighting for the cause, combined with toxic negativity, a lack of common understanding, and the industry's disjointed messaging has resulted in this regulatory uncertainty domestically, and it's diminished American economic competitiveness internationally. And so that is concerning to me now, which is why I literally drove across the country and came back. I never thought I'd come back to Washington, D.C. I figured this was kind of like a checked box, right? I'd done it, but I came back because we are seeing the symptoms now, which are that founders, entrepreneurs are moving out of the country, are being wooed to these new crypto hubs that may not be in the best places for may not be in NATO countries, let's say, if we want to be very specific about that. And there's a lot of money being rolled out to entrepreneurs because they want the jobs. They know that they can create workforces that are skilled, that can participate in these new economic futures that are coming. And ultimately, it helps their country gain a strategic advantage in the world because they're going to have within their own country innovators that are creating powerful new things, right? They're creating new technologies. And yes, it's Web3 today, but like I said, it's Web4, it's Web5, it's AI, XR, VR. I mean, we are in the renaissance of our time. Like, if people don't wake up to the fact that this is the pattern of a renaissance and we are in it, this is the great leap forward for humanity. And you either participate in it or you don't. And my fear right now is that because of a lot of just the lack of understanding is what I would boil it all down to, that this is a technology and it's not a financial instrument. It's not a crypto casino that we're talking about. This is an entire stack of tech, which is just a huge new building block. And this is the next internet. And people don't realize that. This is the next thing that every entrepreneur is building upon. They're not building in the same way they used to, right? They're building in an entirely new way. And if we don't bring everyone up to speed in a way that understands the need for common languages, the need for common ground and ask questions, we can't just lobby our way out of this situation. We can't just put draft legislation in front of a decision maker and say, push this through, because it's not going to happen. And I'm seeing that. It's disappointing to me, but that's the industry sort of playing as quickly as they can to arbitrage the situation. And that is not the right thing for the United States of America.
Very, very well said. And I feel the same. I now spend most of my time in Colombia. I have a dual citizenship there. And if things continue on the regulatory side, I have no problem with saying, if you guys aren't going to let me play this type of music, then I'm going to go where I can play it. I kind of almost feel like Kevin Bacon in Footloose sometimes. I'm like, well, if I can't dance here, I can go other places, And it really is tough to see that brain drain, right? Because normally the United States is a place that is open to people coming here who bring talents. And if people start leaving, that is definitely something to keep an eye on long term. As you're saying, this isn't about Web3. Like you're saying, this is about Web5. Because if we get to Web5, we're going to be like, oh, where is everyone? Well, okay, they left. They went to United Arab Emirates. They went to El Salvador. They went to all these other countries that were opening the doors, paying people to come in and being super welcoming and really creating the type of soil that you would need to have a good harvest, right? So I want to transition super quickly here and just ask, who is Founder for? Who are the people that should be reaching out to get in touch with you to support what Founder is doing? Who exactly? Because there is an article that was written about your meetup in New York, and I will attach that in the show notes. But if you had to say it in 30 seconds to a minute, who are you looking for? Because a whole host of different people listen to this podcast: builders, creators, investors, people that are curious, crypto curious or Web3 curious, and everything in between.
If you are aimed at accelerating the adoption of responsible Web3 and blockchain technology in your community, like wherever you live in the world, then you should sign up for Founder. Because we are starting in Washington, D.C. We are, membership is free. Anyone can sign up and be a part of this. This is really about who is creating the future of the world. Right? That is what Founder is about. I believe there has to be this network. There has to be this group of civic-minded individuals that care about their communities and that understand that it's their role to help other people understand this technology and want it to exist in the world and want them to benefit and not be left behind. So sign up, be a part of it. Yes, I mean, we're looking for corporate sponsors. Membership is free. Our events are free. We're doing educational events. Like everything we can do is free because that increases access to this information in a very powerful way. But if you are a corporation, if you want to, be connected to this group of individuals, like what do you have to bring to the table? We're excited about how this can all come together. I think it's something that I have built a lot of movements in my life. I've never experienced something like this. It's already picking up, as I said, New York and Austin already happening. Obviously, it's in Washington, D.C., but this is picking up outside of America as well, where folks are saying, we gotta bring Founder to Westminster, right over in the UK. Like we gotta do the same thing. We gotta get these stories over there. We gotta start talking about. And over in India, people are concerned because all the entrepreneurs in India are moving to Dubai because the red carpet's getting rolled out. People are concerned. So Vietnam, like everywhere in the world, is going to have this need for civic-minded entrepreneurs, builders, and innovators who are willing to sit down with civic leaders and Web2 leaders, just everyone, and just say, look, this is what this technology is. You need to understand this because you're a decision maker. And I'm not going to tell you what to decide, but here's the scary stuff. Here's what's possible. And here's the great stuff about it. Like we have to figure out how to do this together.
Perfect. And for people interested, can you go ahead and take the time to shout out where people can find you and also learn more about Founder?
So I am on Twitter at David All, DAVIDALL. Founder is at Founder with a 3. So FOUND3R USA on Twitter, or X as I guess the new brand. But we're also on Linktree, just Google or Twitter search for it. You'll find some stuff.
Perfect. I will add all of those links below. And David, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm sure we will continue to create together as we're on a very similar mission.
Jarrett, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for checking out this episode of More Than Blockchain. And to get in touch with David, read the article that recently came out about his New York meetup, and check out the other links that are tied to Founder, go ahead and check out the episode show notes where I'm going to leave all of these links. As always, please follow us on social media at More Than Blockchain. If you don't do so, however, please go ahead and follow us on YouTube. No matter where you listen to the podcast, go ahead and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, and you think you have a friend, family member, or colleague that could also gain some value from this episode, go ahead and share the link with them. Thanks again for checking out More Than Blockchain, and I'll see you next time.